Thank you guys all for showing up here and giving us your weekend. Really appreciate it, and it's really an honor to be able to get out here and share some of the things that I've learned over the years. And one thing I'm going to start about with this quarter crack series that I'm going to tell you about is this whole kind of way that I do things all started from one particular situation. Several years ago, I was asked to come in to work on a quarter crack by a Hall of Fame trainer. And what I could not believe was how, I don't want to say ignorant's kind of a mean word or harsh word, but how uneducated a lot of people were about quarter cracks. And this horse that they asked me to come in and work on had been non-weight bearing for 5 days before they called me in to look at it. He had been already previously looked at by another farrier, and he had patched the horse, and they never reached back out to that farrier and even let him know that the horse was having trouble. And because of that situation, I kind of changed the way that I do things. I always put a drain in them to where, like, if they do get infected, that there's actually an opportunity for it to drain and not end up penetrating deeper into the hoof capsule. What ended up happening with this horse is that I got there, I put the foot up on the foot stand, was going to take the patch off, and they said, wait, we paid $800 to have this horse's foot fixed. And I said, well, it's infected. I said, how exactly am I supposed to fix it if I don't take this off? And they were hemming and hawing, and I just realized that no one there had an answer, and it's the best thing that ever happened to me. It wasn't the best thing that ever happened to the horse. But what happened was I learned a lot from the situation, and by not ever leaving myself without checking back on horses, making sure that I have drain in them for the infections to be able to drain. This horse, I told him, if you don't want me to take that patch off, I really, really encourage you guys to take this horse to the clinic and have him checked out there, because this horse is in trouble. And they, sure enough, they took him to the clinic. They took the patch off, of course, when they got over there. The infection had actually went into the bone, and they lost that horse. And if I would have opened it up, I'm telling you, I would have owned that horse. I'd have been the guy that, because I wouldn't have known it was infected right away. I mean, I know it was infected, but I didn't really realize that it went to the bone. So I'd have been, doing the obvious treatment that we would generally do, but I would have lost the fight because it was already into the bone by the time I would have gotten involved in. So it was like one of those things that sometimes you're lucky when you're not involved. Sometimes you say, oh, I wish I had got that phone call. Well, sometimes you're lucky to be the guy that did not get the phone call. So that's how this all kind of really started in the way that I approach my quarter cracks. Go ahead, Rachel. So identifying the causes and choosing a treatment method, preparing the foot, thorough go through the application, management plan, and follow-up is what we're going to try to go over, and create a plan when you get involved with these, and keep records, again, because you never know. A lot of pictures, some videos of the horses walking. A lot of this stuff can end up saving your butt somewhere down the road. People forget where you started very easily in these situations. So this is something that, because I get called in so often on quarter cracks, I said right away they start the blame game. It's like it's the farrier's fault. It's somebody's fault. There's really, honestly, 3 categories of types of quarter cracks, and as I was originally mostly always involved in racing. As times went on, I've gotten more and more involved in the sport horse world. And as I started getting more involved in the sport horse world, the different disciplines, jumping, dressage, things like that, I started seeing the quarter cracks that I was seeing on these horses being quite different from what I was used to seeing. And I was like, why is that? So I started kind of investigating and paying attention to it, and I've kind of been able to put those cracks into 3 different categories. And so the other thing is acknowledging nothing is for certain. When I come in and tell people ask me to come in and work on quarter cracks, a lot of times I tell them, I think this is very easily managed, but I can't promise you that I'm going to fix this and you're never going to look back and have another issue. And if you're honest with them up front, I say, you know, I can keep this horse in the ring, no problem, and it's not detrimental to the horse. But I cannot promise you that this isn't going to be a reoccurring thing. And maybe it's because of conformation, maybe you know, something, maybe an old injury to the foot, that there's a weakness there that you just aren't going to be able to fix long term. So this is something that I recently got, these pictures, and I'm so fortunate. What's her name? Paige Poss gave these to me. I always kind of joke around, she has these books that are just amazing anatomy books. And I said, she's the only person I know can take a dead leg and make it look sexy. It's like, her photography work's unbelievable. But I fortunately haven't had too many quarter cracks that we got to dissect, because fortunately I've been able to keep them alive and going forward. But this was something that she came across and dissected this and broke it down, and it's one of the reasons that I try to convince people to look at the way that I approach doing quarter cracks as opposed to trying to just shoo their way out of it. I hear it a lot. Well, I put bar shoes on, I floated it, but I'm still struggling with it. And I'm saying, well, did you patch it? No, I didn't patch it. I didn't think I had to. We cleaned it up, but we didn't patch it. I, in many cases, don't change the shoeing that much unless I have to, because I'm not succeeding. The horse has been able to be shod that way for his career, and suddenly now we're going to put some big package on that is harder and harder to replicate. And then at what point do we take them out of it? So these pictures show a great reason why you maybe don't want to just try to shoo your way out of it. This here is actually a dissection of this, and you can see how that crack actually is like, it goes all over the place, and it just looks like if you just put a patch over that surface, you're not even touching what's really going on inside that foot. Go ahead. So this here is really interesting. This is actually you can see where the lamina's been actually scarred, and it's tried to heal itself. It's trying to protect itself. There's so much movement going on there, and it's been going on for so long that it's created like a callus instead of it being able to grow down. And that's why you see a lot of these horses that have had quarter cracks that have that big seam in their foot, is that they were probably trying to be shod out of it, and there was that continuous movement that ended up happening, and this is what's going on inside. And look at what happened to the bone. It even affected the bone. And that's just from all the inflammation there that's actually degraded that bone over time.
This is all that same foot?
That's all that same foot. So it's pretty neat. I owe her a lot for letting me have these pictures, but it's just been one more step of really kind of being able to explain something that I've never had before. So it's a much deeper look into it.
How long would you expect before irreparable damage is done there?
Oh, it'd be a while. But I mean, the callousing can happen within this, I'd say 6 months, but I don't know that it would really do the bone unless it got infected or something like that. But if it was just the movement, I don't think it would really affect the bone unless it was really sore and was really in trouble in that respect. But the callousing, I think, is something that happens much sooner. And again, the hoof wall is going to be degraded where you might not ever get that real good attachment, good solid growth again where you never look back. So go ahead, Archie. Okay, so the number one reason that I see in the first category, I guess is what I'm going to say, is concussion. This is what I would generally see in the racing industry. And the location of them is generally in the heels, way far back. This here's a very atypical crack that you can see way back in the heel. And we can go ahead next. So rotation is the second category. And this can be from like high impact, from like these horses, these jumpers especially, they're coming over like huge jumps, and as you can see here, that rider's already looking to its right before he hits the ground. They're cranking this horse, they're landing and they're twisting. And it can be conformation as well. There's a lot of rotational issues that can be seen. This here's a great example of conformation you'll see. But those cracks generally are much further forward, and generally in the hairline and the cornet band. And you'll see that's what we see mostly in the sport horses. Here's a typical jumper that I was working on and brought in to look at, and this was a really weird case. This horse every year when he would go to Kentucky, he'd blow apart, and it's like literally he'd come to Florida a mess. We'd work on him, we'd get him all healed up, and he would go back to Kentucky for the spring, and he would crack every spring. And for I think 3 years, I would start going to Kentucky in the spring to fix this horse. That's interesting. So here's again a rotational crack. Something that you can see there is a lot of these rotational cracks too in the sport horses. And I'm not anti-clip, don't get me wrong, but it's something I want you to pay attention to. Because a lot of times if you follow these cracks down, they'll lead right into the back end of the clip. So in many cases, I try to convince people to see if we can get out of clips for a while and see if we can shoot the horse up without them putting that pressure and that clamping on the front half of the foot and breaking down the heel. So, trauma is another one. I've had a case that pictures that'll come up. This horse actually got a little tangled up in a fence and ended up stepping on itself, and it looked very much like a typical rotational crack. It was cracked at the cornet band, but I seen some where some hair was missing on the cornet band, and it made me kind of investigate a little bit more. What's kind of interesting about the trauma is that, you can go ahead with the next one, is this is that foot. What's interesting about them is they're usually a lot of deep bruising in them. And so what ends up happening is over time the lamina lets go. It doesn't let go right away. It kind of does it over a period of time. So it may just be a crack, and you may take your Dremel and open it up, and it seems like everything's attached. But over a fairly short period of time, it starts to let go, and you start having this big piece of foot wall that's not attached to anything. So this is actually the thing that you need to take the most time with. If it's actually trauma, most of these other cracks, I'm able to go in and literally fix them the day they happen and put them back in the ring. The trauma, that's something you got to take your time on. And let's see what we got next there. This is another one that it's kind of, this was a rotational crack that kind of turned into trauma. It was like, basically it got so infected and so much pressure in the hoof capsule that it killed the attachment. And what was interesting about this is Dr. Steele asked me to come in and work on this horse. And when it first got there, it was pretty much just looked like a quarter crack, but this thing was really, really sore. And you could see there was infection in the cornet band. And he said, he knew that there was an infection in there, but what had been interesting about it is the inflammation had gotten so severe that it killed the attachment on both sides of the crack. And as that foot was kind of dehydrating and dying, it was actually curling around and cutting into the foot. So we ended up having to go out I'd say about 3/4 of an inch on either side of the crack and cut that off, and none of that was attached. But the edge that had been one time met each other had actually curled in, and it was like two knives that were literally cutting into his lamina. It was really, really something. What was amazing about this was, as bad as that looks, in about 40 days we had him back in the ring. Okay, treatment methods. I'm not at all saying that, some of the ways that we've done things before with staples, somebody was talking to me earlier about, how we used to stitch them, how we used to put staples in them. A lot of that stuff still works. I'm not saying it doesn't work. But what I can tell you is that by changing it over and kind of doing it the way we do, if something goes wrong, there's a lot less to take apart in trying to go back and start over. That to me is one of the biggest differences that I can really say that without hands down is the biggest difference. And still very, very successful in doing it that way. So this horse here actually turned out fine. You can see that it obviously had been infected too. Looking at the cornet band, had the stitches, had bar shoes, had the kind of the package shown at him, and it turned out well. I ended up not, I was asked to look at it, but never really had to get involved with it because everything went okay. You can go ahead. So why go alternative? Well, as I said, a lot of times I'm trying to figure out how to get the horse back in the ring as quickly as I can, and as simple as I can. I always say that, you know, it's less obtrusive to the foot, not putting all the wires and laces into it. Sometimes I'll go with the synthetic shoes to break down, lessen the concussion and amazing. In so many cases for a long time when we'd have quarter cracks, we were trying to stabilize them. But I never imagined that freeing the foot up would actually be beneficial. But it really, in some cases, it's been amazing how much better it is to free the foot up instead of trying to contain it. Again, medication, leaving that drain in there. I never do a patch without putting a drain in. I always want to make sure that I don't end up in that same place that other farrier. By the way, they never told that farrier that that horse was infected. He never even knew anything about it until after the horse was put down. That's pretty crappy. And how would you feel if you were in that position? And that was really why I wanted to make sure that I never let myself be in that position by somebody else doing something wrong. I go ahead and do it. I use some different fabrics that have been around than what we've used in the past, just because a lot of times they're not as bulky and as intrusive. What else we got? The aftercare. The aftercare is a big thing. What I do is I try to get the clients involved in the aftercare of this horse by flushing the drain every day, medicating it every day. And part of that is I really preach to them that they're going to be as much a part of the success of this as what the work was that I did on it. And they get involved, and that way if something starts going wrong, they're seeing it right away. It's not like a week later and the thing is really in trouble. They're seeing it on a daily basis, and when they see something going the wrong way, I said, make sure you let me know. And so that daily aftercare is huge. Okay. So this is a kind of a cool little case study. I got a good friend of mine, Zach Osborne, that uses my shoes, and he had a bad quarter crack that had looked like it was calming down. The next thing you know is it fired up and it blew out the whole cornet band. And he says, "You keep telling me that putting synthetic shoes on these on these quarter cracks works." He said, "Well, I'm going to test it out on this one." And so you can see that's a pretty ugly shape. Go ahead. This is 2 shootings later. Go ahead. And that's 2 shootings after that. And there's no bar shoes, there's no big pour-ins, there's not a big science project on there that you have to get rid. Have to figure out when we're going to wean this horse out of this. And so in some cases, it's just amazing what you can do by just using a different kind of shoe than normal too. So this is the biggest thing is that what we've had success with this. It's probably a little hard to see with the lighting we have here, but on the shoe on the left-hand side, Rachel will go ahead and put the laser up there. And what I do is on a lot of these horses, when I'm gluing on, I actually will put Thrush Buster or something like that in there, and any of the stretching, the white line that's in trouble, just to make sure that I don't get any infections going. Well, you can actually see where there's a kink in the white line when we pulled the shoe off. You can see that, and that's actually where the crack actually met the ground, and right where that big deviation is. When you flip the shoe over, you can see that on the shoe on the right. He wore that shoe completely out. He scooped it out in the quarter. We didn't do that. The horse did that. And in most cases, a lot of times when we'd be doing a quarter crack, what do? We float the heel behind the crack, right? Well, the thickest part on this entire shoe at the end of the shoeing cycle was the heel behind the crack. How does that make sense? But the horse never cracks when he wears these shoes. He does great. Veterinarian hates these shoes. Thinks they're awful, right? Well, it convinces the owner about every year and a half, takes shoes off. Guess what he gets? Another quarter crack. She finally told him, "Don't you ever mention those shoes again, or you're going to be the next one that's out the door." But look at the lateral wear. You can see how the horse wore really laterally, and scoop that heel out. And you're wondering, how does that horse move that he's actually doing that? And it just mystifies me that some of the things that you see these horses actually do in the way that they're moving.
So what causes his reoccurring quarter crack when he goes back into the steel shoe then? Just the stability, and did he have a scar or something there?
So he did have a scar. He had had quarter cracks prior to me coming in. The other thing was is that I don't really know why this is, but when we took x-rays of this horse, that foot's actually his good foot. The other foot is actually missing about a third of the coffin going on the medial side. It's in rough shape, but he's pretty sound for the most part, or seems to be. But I guess what he's doing is he's overlocked, he's compensating, and he's putting a lot more pressure on that other side. And I always said, thank God that that's the side that's breaking, because we're able to keep him
So
going.
the stability of the steel shoe versus them is not the cause of that.
I wish I could tell you. I mean, that's the craziest thing about this is that we were talking, Mike was saying earlier, the longer that we do this, the stupider you feel. I mean, I see things that just don't make sense, and I mean, this is a perfect example of that. But the thing of it is when you see it working, you're willing to go back and give it another go. And when you have multiple things that go right, well, then you're willing to start repeating them in certain situations. So go ahead. So, this here's some of the typical stuff that I would see, where guys are, Z-bars or something to that effect. Maybe patching it, putting a bar shoe on, floating the heel aggressively. Here's a shoe on the right there. It was one of our shoes that somebody did pour in and frog support. All these are definitely, I'm not saying you can't do these things, but the thing of it is at some point you end up having to wean the horse back out of it. And then what happens? A lot of times they re-injure themselves because they've been using themselves so differently. And the foot is kind of calloused up or, got this different strengths that you end up with a whole different series of issues. So I try to keep it as simple as I can, honestly. So this was an interesting case. I often ask people, what are your thoughts? What kind of crack is this? And so I'm going to ask you guys: is it a concussion? Raise your hand if you think it's concussion. Rotation? Raise your hands. No. How about one trump?
What side of the foot is it?
It's medium. Did you say, which one did you say?
The last.
The last one? Blunt drum? Well, you guys are right, because I was wrong. I thought it was rotational. It was a big jumper, and they had the first time that he cracked, he was a fairly new horse to me, came in from Europe, atypical. What did they do? They took the toe clips off on, put quarter clips on, and guess what? He got a big old crack that ran down from the clips up to the cornet band. So I was like, that's a rotational crack for sure. So I worked on it and got him going. He goes in the ring, did really well that winter. He goes on the road for the summer, and they're up in Canada, and next thing you know is this thing blows apart again. And they had somebody come in and they put a metal patch on it, and he wasn't going well. They took that off, and they tried putting some different patches on. It wasn't going well. And when I got there, I was really upset because you see the picture on the right-hand side. They drilled a whole bunch of holes in the side of this horse's foot to get the glue to stick. Right. So if you look at it, I don't know if you can see some of those actual drill holes. So anyway, when I went to clean this foot up, that whole wall just kept exfoliating. It wasn't like all infected under there, but it just kind of kept peeling off. It didn't have any integrity at all. And so I was like pissed. I was thinking, that was really the cause of them drilling all those holes in. Well, anyway, I don't know what's the next slide. Okay, let's just go there. Yeah. So I'm going to stay on this. This horse taught me again that like Seamus used to do. Make sure you go watch your horses. Pay attention to them. This horse ended up. What happened was that I went up. I got the horse going again, and we were going along. But he wasn't as good as I really hoped. I mean, he kept growing out, but it seemed like it would kind of keep fissuring back up. I wasn't having the progress that I normally see. So anyway, he was in a big class, Grand Prix down in Wellington, and the family invited me to the Grand Prix that night, and dinner and all the, nice box seats. So I said, you know what, why not? So I went down there. Now, not every jump, but every now and again as he would jump, he would knock his front feet together so hard, it sounded like somebody was hitting it with an aluminum bat. I went back and I started looking at it, and I was like, you could see where like he was actually hitting that patch, and I hadn't really noticed it before. So we ended up making a special pair of bell boots for the horse. And guess what? I never had to patch him again. That was the end of it. And so it was just amazing that, you never know what's going to end up being the cause of some of these things. And it's not an imbalance, not Farrier didn't do something wrong. Everybody wants to start pointing fingers, and it's a horse that they paid $3 million for, and somebody had to do something wrong, because when he came here from Europe, he did not have anything wrong with him. So it was just a terrible blame game going on, and we fixed it with a pair of bell boots.
What did you do with the bell boots?
So what we did is we took a pair of bell boots that fit them pretty well, and those kind of the outdoor doilies that you can put on your furniture outside, or like on your patio. They're kind of see-through and they're rubbery. It's almost like I don't know, how do you explain it? It's like they're kind of like a foam neoprene type thing, but you can see through them and they're fairly thick. So what we did is we actually cut triangles out of that, and we found a flexible glue that we glued those on the inside of the pad, so we made them a lot softer. And yet they were still pretty flexible. They didn't change really the way that
Padded the inside of the bell boot.
we padded the inside of the belt boot. That was basically it. So, yeah. So again, like I said, the lacing we talked about a little bit earlier. Again, this is a good outcome. It's not something I tell you don't do because you're going to screw them up. Not at all. I mean, it can definitely help. But as I said, when one of these goes wrong and you have to start taking all that off, you can see that it's not a good deal. You end up losing a lot more wall on either side of the crack than what I feel is necessary. So this is kind of a typical case, a pretty ugly one that had gotten infected, and we actually had to use some silver nitrate sticks to try to actually burn some of the tissue that started to boil out. And put some pressure bandages on it, get it all quieted down before we could go on and patch it. So we're going to go over some of the equipment that you need, tools and everything that we'll go through as we go through this. So the kind of 3 stages of prepping the foot. We go ahead and a lot of times I take my buffy and I clean all the hoof wall well beyond the area that I'm going to be working on, just to have a good clean surface to start on. And then I'll use the Dremel to go ahead and open up the crack. And it's so important to find out which direction that crack goes. They never go straight in. They always are undermined, usually to the heel, towards the heel, but every once in a while you'll find one that actually fissures towards the toe. And it's really important to make sure that you get rid of that overlap, because if you don't, you're not going to be as successful with the glue. And then we use the torch to dry the foot before we prepping it. And the reason we do that is we get a really, really good healthy bond with the glue when we use the torch on there. So here we go, just going over buffing the foot up. And then you can see this, and this is kind of the reason that why I don't, I'm cleaning up the crack and everything, but this is a crack that I've obviously done a few times now. That was actually the horse that you seen in the picture earlier, where we were actually using the silver nitrate sticks. Well, look how much growth there is from the cornet band down. But look how clean that crack is. What we do is each and every month in the shoeing cycle, I take everything off. I clean up all the loose, broken ends of the tubula and repatch, put a new drain in, redo it all. And what you do is you end up with nothing more than just a trough that's growing out. And you can see in the cornet band, he's got a definite little deviation in that. But he was, he had that before it wasn't the first time he'd ever gotten a quarter crack. And this was a great example where I told them, I can keep this horse in the ring if you manage him properly. He probably will never miss a class. but that you're never going to probably completely fix this horse. And that's been the case. He's been a repeat offender, but he's also been able to keep going and keep rolling on, doing really good. But this is the coolest part about it is when you see that progression and how they grow out and how clean they get as you keep doing them over and over. And that's really the part that I think sells you. When you start doing it, you're like, wow, that does make a huge difference. So yeah, we're going to go over a little bit. You know, we've cleaned it all up. We got the horse shod, and now I'm going to go ahead and I use these little micro torches that you can get it a lot of times at a gas station. It's like, you know, cigarette lighter, basically on steroids. And you can dial them down, and you can also be very careful about where you're putting that flame. You're able to dry the hoof wall, but yet you can keep it from burning any sensitive tissue. That if you're close down in that crack, you can, you know, angle it to where you're not end up burning the horse.
And it's more important to torch the outside connecting parts.
Oh yeah, good point. It's very important to always drive further away from the foot than necessary, because when you torch that foot, it's just amazing the difference in the bond that you get with your glue. And so I always work well beyond the borders of where I feel that I need my patches. Everything is always exaggerated to make sure that I don't end up having failures where the glue is starting to let go. Here you can just see where using that little torch. And I've already went over why I do it. And I just have a little wire brush there that I use, and as I'm drying it, I keep scrubbing on it, and I keep getting dust off of it. And when you see where you're eliminating having any of that dust coming off, I guess my time is up. So anyway, that's we can go on to the next one. So this is what we do: is we apply a drain in there. And it's sort of like a double-sided tape. It has an adhesive on it that we're able to put in there. And I try to make the actual drain as small as I can. It comes in a strip that's, I don't know, maybe a 1/4 inch wide. But I a lot of times cut them in half, or maybe a third of it off, and I'll use the 2/3 to go down through the drain. Because always think of it this way: the bigger the bridge is, the more likely for failure. So if you can have a smaller drain, there's less likely for movement to be going on underneath that patch. So we can go ahead on to the next stage. So then what I'll do is I'll put a liner across the cornet band, and this is going to help you with your cleanup to where you don't end up having glue going up into the cornet band. And it's also probably one of the biggest mistakes I see people do is not make their patch high enough. When they crack, they're always kind of worried about the ground contact. They're always trying to patch the part that's hitting the ground that seems to be splitting. You're never going to be able to get any forward progression if you don't get it knitting together at the cornet band and starting to grow down. So that leading edge is the most important part. So make that drain as absolutely, or that liner across the cornet band as close to the cornet band as possible. And then generally what I do is, I forgot to do this, so I ended up having to do it later, is usually when I put this on there, I actually put a bit of electrical tape around it to make sure it doesn't move. Because without fail, just about time you're starting to put the glue on there, the adhesive lets go. And so what I'll do is I'll put tape around it, but you'll see that here. I just want to make sure I didn't forget.
And you can use them as boundaries.
Yeah. Also, a lot of times, I didn't do it in this one, but a lot of times what I'll do is they'll take the liners and I'll make boundaries of how far I want the glue to go, how far forward and medially a lot of times. But it's kind of funny that it's not until Rachel's came to work with me that I started taking more pictures. And most of the times when I went in to work on these horses, like the last thing I was thinking about was, boy, this is going to be a really good before and after picture. I'm wringing my hands praying to God nothing goes wrong so that I maybe get another phone call someday from these people. But this year is a kind of atypical patch placement. I try to go about, at least an inch or so, inch and a half on either side of the crack to make sure that I stabilize it well enough. I don't want to over-stabilize it. That's why I kind of stay away from using metal and things like that. I feel that if we can make the foot function as close to normal, you're going to have good growth. We mentioned earlier today that sometimes if you have too much concussion or something like that, it can stop growth, or not enough can decrease growth. Where it's not stimulated and get growth. So I think if the more natural movement that we can get in this. So I never try to make my patches really any thicker than say what the hoof wall would be. You know, I might double the hoof wall thickness, but that would be the most that I really want to build it out.
So do you ever use an option of keeping the horse barefoot when you're patching these, or are you always applying a shoe at some time?
I don't usually ever get called in unless they're trying to get like back in the ring or in a race. I mean, like last year, Justified was hurt after the Kentucky Derby, and it was do or die. I was like, there's never another Preakness or another Belmont for a 3-year-old. It's either we make it or we don't. And so that's my atypical, you know. But it's also taught me a lot that I'm under that kind of pressure that I have to find scenarios that work. So as we go ahead and go through the application of the patch, what I generally do is the first layer that I put down, because I come back and do these again and again, is I want to keep that hoof wall as healthy as possible. So what I do is I put a little copper sulfate in the glue and mix that up. And what I'll do is I'll apply that over the area at the hoof contact. Now I don't do it through the entire patch, but I just make a skim coat over it. And one thing that I want you to think about too in this process is, like, if you're actually down all the way to sensitive tissue, the more glue that you have, the more heat you're going to have. So if I can do a skim coat of this, I can do two things. I can have something that's going to help decrease bacteria or anything going on underneath that patch. And second of all, I'm going to create an insulation for when I start to build the patch, that heat's not able to go into that sensitive tissue and upset it and get it weakening and going on. So we can go to the next slide here. Here I realized I didn't put my tape on, so, and I was fortunate enough it didn't move, at least not in the picture. If it probably did move, that's why I remember. So that's more what we want to do. So now that take the cloth, and this is again where I really feel it's important that you learn from people that do a lot of this. I use this cloth, I did many of them, but every once in a while I'd have a failure. And you know, maybe the patch would crack or something like that, and I couldn't quite figure out why. And as time went by, as I kept taking those failures off, I started finding that a lot of them actually had air pockets when I was putting them in. So a lot of times when I'd take the cloth, I would wet the cloth and then I'd fold it over and I'd put it on there. But what was happening was I was trapping air in there. So I kind of changed my own way of doing things, and that's why I think it's so important never to get kind of stuck in a rut. You got to learn to keep looking for new options. Is I started cutting the pieces into smaller pieces. I still use only 2 pieces of cloth, and a lot of times not even the whole 2 pieces that I generally suggest using, but I cut them into smaller pieces. And what I do is I kind of lay them almost like paper mache on the foot. So let's see here. So how I apply them is I set those pieces of cloth out that are pre-cut. And especially one thing I want to mention here that's not so much the case here, if you got one of those cornet bands that's got a big hook in it, you know, or an arch in it, a lot of times I cut the pieces even smaller so that I can make sure that I can get that cloth up into that arch. If it's too wide, if I'm all the way up, I'm going to be overlapping the cornet band and things like that. So, yeah, and same thing with the liner, yeah. So anyway, so what I do is I mix up the glue without any copper sulfate now, and I put it in the palm of my hand, and I take this stick and I just literally touch the cloth and it'll pick it up, put it in my hand, swipe it a couple times, and I'll put it on the foot and start building. What I don't think I showed here is that before I actually start putting the cloth on, I'll take a little bit of the glue out of the cup and I'll just smear and put a little bit of glue actually on the foot first, kind of re-wet it. But glue will stick to glue very well. You don't have to like let it cure and then have to, you know, sand it and get it pre-prepped again. As long as you haven't been touching it or messing with it, glue will bond very, very well to glue. So here I'm going ahead and I'm starting to put the layers on, and I'll just lay them on there. And what I'll do is a lot of times I'll take, say, 2, maybe 3 pieces of cloth on there, and then what I'll do is I'll start working it in with my thumb, and you'll hear little crackings. And what that is the air pockets, or little pockets that are blowing out. And and that makes it to make sure you eliminate those. Instead of doing it on every piece of cloth, I do it every few, because my glue is in the process of setting up. And glues are funny. The more that you mess with them as they're trying to cure, the weaker they get. So what you want to do is the minute I start feeling a difference in that texture of that glue as I'm working it, I stop and I mix up another batch of glue and I start over again. So it may take me 2 or 3 squirts of, or different bits of glue, but I keep working it and building up that patch until I get it where I want it.
What's your preferred glue?
I use the methacrylate glues. I sell my own glue, but I get it from the same company Equilux does and Grand Circuit. And we all think that there's differences in these glues. I mean, there are definitely different companies out there that are offering different glues, but for the most part, all of us are buying from the same guy. It's Lord is the company that we buy from. The difference that you see in Grand Circuit and Hoof Life or whoever it might be is how well they're caring for it and how long it's been sitting on shelves and stuff like that. That's the key to that. That's the differences you'll see in the glue. The worst thing that can happen to glue is heat cycle. So that's something we actually talk about a little bit more in the glue-on presentation later. But it's Colorado's a perfect example. This has got to probably be one of the worst places in the world for glue, because it'll get cold as hell in the evening, warm up to really nice and comfortable during the day. That fluctuation kills glue. It is really bad for it. So something, the more stable you can keep it, the longer it'll last. I'm sorry?
It goes in the house every night.
There you go. So I have a cooler that I keep water in, and I keep it in that water. And because there's a lot of water, the temperature doesn't go up and down. It doesn't have to stay cold, but if you can keep the temperature basically the same, it really will. So a great example of, these glues can last a long time as long as that doesn't happen. I was flown down to Colombia to work on a Pasofino one time. Sent all the product down early. Got there, guess what? The glue was in customs and it didn't let it out. And this kind of shady kind of character with a lot of cash that was paying me to come down there was wanting his horse fixed. So I went to the local store. They had 1 tube of slow set Equilux that had expired 1 year previously, and they wanted $100 for it. There was that or nothing. So I bought it, and it had been stored, and Colombia is one of those places that the temperature stays very even throughout the whole year. They call it the eternal spring, and it's a beautiful place. But anyway, because it had been in a really stable environment, guess what? A couple squirts out, I mixed it up, set up, and we worked on the horse, and sure enough, it worked fine. So that's just how long that stuff can last if it's taken care of properly. So,
And then you got home safely.
yeah, and I got home safely. Obviously, I did a good job. Let me on the plane to go home. So, anyway, life will take you down some weird roads, I'll tell you. So, but removing the liners. So, this is kind of one of the trickiest parts of it, is that you grab it from both ends and you start just slowly stretching it. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to get the adhesive to let go. And it doesn't stick to the glue, but as you're moving it slowly but surely, the adhesive that's stuck to the foot will let go, and then it'll slide right out. But is there? I'm sorry.
I said, what happens if it breaks apart?
I've had them break apart, and I had a lady that flew me. Go ahead.
What's that liner made out of?
It's actually I don't know really what to explain it, but like I said, it's almost like double-sided tape. If you've ever felt that, it's kind of like a foam. It's almost like, but the glue will not bond to it.
Oh.
It's pretty neat. So, but anyway, I went to Nebraska one time to do a horse, and as I was pulling the drain out, what happens? It breaks. I couldn't get it out. This lady spent a lot of money to fly me up there to do a crack. I had to take it all off and start all over. And so, I mean, it's just one of those things that, I always say, if you're going to charge big dollars for doing this kind of work, you better leave behind a big dollar job. And to me, that day, I had to take it all apart and do it all over again. And so, it's one of those things. It happens. So this here's a little video that just shows me taking that off. And first off, I've cut the tape from in the back of the pasture. See? Okay. So this is the funny thing about videos. Sometimes they work and sometimes they don't.
We're gonna pass.
Even when you push those buttons up and down.
Even when I push those buttons. I tried that one too. I tried that one too.
She's definitely smarter than me, but sometimes I have to check. So anyway, again, she proves me wrong. So anyway, I'm sorry that doesn't work. But anyway, promise you it came out.
The
So
purpose of that channel is for
medication.
drainage
And treat it.
to add medication.
Absolutely, and to make sure if it does get infected, that it has somewhere to travel to, where it doesn't get trapped inside and end up working its way down to the bone.
So as you build it, when you have your liner coming through from the top to the bottom, you can add medication through the top.
After we
allows
clean.
drainage to the
Yeah.
bottom.
So that's what I actually do and ask them to do on a daily basis after I'm done with this. So we'll go on to that here in a minute. So then basically I clean up the edges of the patch. Like this one, for instance, we did not put borders on. So I'm just using a sanding wheel and I clean up their borders and kind of feather them off and clean them up, make it nice looking patch. So that, and a lot of times I come back in and I work on these and I color them. You can't even see where they're at. And I remember when I was flown in for that horse that I was showing you earlier, that horse was a very, very well-known horse, and they paid over $3 million for him, and he was in Calgary up there for the show up there at Spruce Meadows, and everybody knew that he was hurt because it was like one of the best horses in the country at the time. And they flew me in, I did the crack, and everybody and their brother was walking around that next day as he was going to the ring, trying to see what foot was it that was broken, and they couldn't see it. And that's kind of a cool thing to see everybody trying to shuffle around and see where he was fixed at. So. But, okay. So after I'm done, one of the things is I use a sealer on these, and what it is nothing more than a commercial grade super glue that's really, really watery. And what that does is it creates a coating to where the water just runs off and if the water can't penetrate into the foot, it's less likely to break down that bond with the glue. And I learned this in an unusual way. I'll talk about it now because you guys, the same people will be watching the demonstration later. And, I had a situation where I was brought in to glue shoes on a horse that wasn't doing well by a client I've had for many years. She wanted me to teach her young farrier how to do it. So we did the horse and got it all cleaned up and it looked great. And I started picking up my stuff and taking it to the truck. And the next thing I know is as I walk back in for the next group of things, he's down there smearing his stuff on the horse that I just got done shoeing. And I thought it was oil at first. I was pissed, quite honestly. But anyway, if you knew this owner, or trainer rather, Andrea King, maybe, I don't know if anybody knows her, she's a mean, miserable old lady. And I've worked for her for years and years. And anyway, I'm scared of her, that's why I still work for her. I didn't say anything to the young man about it because I knew how she would treat him if I said anything. I said, so afterward I kind of got to him. I said, hey, what were you putting on there? And he told me, he said, my dad uses this super glue and puts over and things, and he says that it really makes that bond last longer. He says, I'll get 2 or 3 more weeks out of the glue on than I would if I don't put it on. So sure enough, I don't know, probably about 3 weeks later, she had another horse she was having trouble. So she asked me if I'd come over and work on it. So while I was there, I said, hey, could you do me a favor? And let's look at that horse that we did last time. Just while I'm here, let's put my eyes on it. And she brought the horse out, and it literally looked like I had done the horse yesterday. Like I could not believe the difference. And one of the things about Andrea, she treats horses no matter how valuable they are, like horses. If it's raining out, they're outside. They spend the nights outside at night in paddocks. And it don't matter the weather. And she has some, amazing jumpers. And so anyway, they're exposed to a lot more moisture than the average, horse is. And as a matter of fact, one time while we were having a really rainy season, we found out that the sprinklers were going off at the same time. There was nothing to turn them off. And so we were wondering why the paddocks were so wet. and it's like, well, but they would stay good because of this glue, the super glue on them. Our shoes were staying on and doing really well. So
And it's called Seal It.
seal it is what we call it. Yeah. So anyway, flushing the drain. You guys were asking a little bit ago. This is actually what I do. I really recommend a product called Thrush Off, and the reason I use it is that it's very non-caustic. It will not burn one, and so if you're in a position where you're doing this and you don't have Thrush Off, if you use Thrush Buster, I'm not saying you can't use Thrush Buster, but please dilute it drastically with alcohol at least to make it not as strong. Because what I've had,
sensitive tissue, you're good.
Exactly.
You're good with this.
yeah. So what'll happen? Yeah. So if I've had, I'm actually working right now on a horse up in North Carolina, and the lady's flying me up there. She's waited all winter long to be able to ride her horses and dressage at Tryon, and she lives up there. And now the spring is finally there, and what happens? Her horse gets a quarter crack. So what do? They start putting Thrush Buster in the crack, and he went from having a crack and sound to being like three-legged lame. So she called around a little bit. My name was suggested, so I asked, what are you doing with the horse? Sure enough, they were putting on. I said, do me a favor. I said, just go ahead and quit applying any medicine to it. And I said, clean tracks the horse and just soak it in some hot water and Epsom salts and tell me what happens. He sound. So they were actually blistering the horse on a daily basis. And once it's upset, you keep putting more on it, it's not going to get better. It's going to get worse. And so anyway, this here is an amazing product that does a really good job. There's one downside to it, that there's a lot of organic material in it. So what happens is when you squirt it in there, if you leave it in there, it'll start to dry and cake up and it'll close the hole up. So what I do is I ask them to put the medication in until it runs out the bottom, and then put air in the syringe, and then pump it a couple times to get rid of any excess material that's in the drain. So that's a really important thing. We actually started making another product that we sell to flush these, that if that ends up happening. But I usually still, when they're fresh and they're down to sensitive tissue, I've had so much luck with this that I don't care if I make something that's good, I still want you to start with this. I might say you can change to something later, but for right now, this is one of the products that I think is one of the best that I've come across.
You said if all you had was Thrush Buster, you dilute it with what?
With alcohol, yeah. And at least in half, and maybe even a third Thrush Buster and 2/3 alcohol. So you want to really dilute it down. And it's still not ideal, but it's, if you need to treat it, you can do that. If you can get clean tracks, that's great. Don't worry about flushing it. Just soak them. You got a drain in there, so it's going to penetrate. And that's something that you can use too, especially if you're dealing with where we have exposed sensitive tissue.
So you're soaking that foot after your patch is on there?
It can be, or even before. Like if I have time, I'll have them clean. Like that horse that I'm doing in North Carolina, I had clean tracks that horse a couple days before I went up there, so that I was going to be in the best position. Because a lot of times I got a flight going in, and it's got to be done that day. I can't stick around and soak the horse and do it. I've had customers that are willing to pay me to stay, but for the most part, I go in and I do my job for that day and I'm back out.
But it's not a problem for that patch job to soak that clean track.
Once that patch is on there and it's applied, have the sealer on there, you can treat it like it's not there. And you can soak them, you can do whatever you need to do them.
So do you ever find that your walls get mushy under your patch because of retaining moisture if you have to do that for extended period?
So that's one of the reasons that we do the copper sulfate, and that's one of the reasons why we do it on a monthly basis. Usually what happens, if you see, and we're going to have a slide here in a little bit that shows you, you've asked a good question, I just haven't gotten it. And so I always check back. Again, I learned a very valuable lesson from those people that did not let that farrier know that things went wrong. So in these cases, I check in a lot. I don't allow myself to be in that position where I left a horse behind that's going to end up. I'm a big softie when it comes to that stuff. I just like, I feel, I did it, you know what I mean? And that farrier that had that horse that got put down, I know him really well, and I can promise you, he may have charged $800, but he'd been one of the first guys that would have taken it off and redone it for nothing, and he didn't get that opportunity. You know what I mean? They made that guy a bad guy, and it's something that he lives with, and it was a very, very well-known good horse as well. And not every horse is important to our customers. I work on a Kentucky Derby winner, you know, horses of that caliber, Olympic horses, World Cup horses. But guess what? You know, Muffy in the backyard that is just as important to that client is that, you know, sometimes those top athletes, they're just looking for the next good one. You know, that horse behind the pasture, there might be a lot of history to that horse. So we talked a little bit about shoeing and using the synthetic shoes. Something that I've also had a lot of luck at, and that sometimes is more economically friendly, split flops. I had a lot of success with horses that have cracks that we do flip flops on. And this here is a brand that we actually make. And what we did is we designed them to be a little bit more on the lines for sport horses instead of like the standardbred race horses. And so what they're made to do is the heel behind it actually marries up really nicely to an 8mm shoe. So it creates a nice flush platform for them to stand on. And we ended up having some horses that were doing so well in them that in the grass classes and the 100 derbies and stuff like that, they needed traction. And they were like, you know, we can't use the flip-flops because we need studs. So what we did is we started making them where we had an insert put in to where we were able to put studs in them. You can't put railroad spikes in them, but you can put a nice road stud in there and, you know, get through your classes and do really well. And it's going to be safe for a horse and rider, so it works good. So I'm going to kind of go through a patching, and just to show that, you know, like I don't always put synthetic shoes on them. In some cases, this year's actually a quarter horse mare that I've worked on for quite a long time. She was kind of a weird case that she would always have, her frog would always really prolapse really bad, and everybody kept trying to fix it. And they would put bar shoes on her, spider plates, heart bars, all this stuff, and she would get terrible sore, crippled, and I got called in to ask to work on her. She had quarter cracks, lame, and I said, well, how about we just quit trying to fix her? You know, I'll do the patch. I'll just make sure that I put a nice big old heel check in, let her frog meet the ground, and let's see what happens. And guess what? She ended up being one of the top quarter horses, show horses in the country that year. And she actually, one year she was champion in her division and stuff. So. But anyway, what I'll do sometimes is I'll actually wrap the shoe with tape before I nail it on. And the reason for that is I don't want the glue to actually bond to the shoe. So after I'm done, I just rasp that off, and there might still be a layer of tape in between the foot and the shoe, but I'm not worried about that. So here's a great example of where I did use that liner, where I wrap it around the back side of the heel, to where I use that as a border to how far I'm going to build that patch towards the back half. I did not end up putting tape on this one, but everything stayed in place. This patch was actually one that I had done a fair while ago, and a lot of times I had still been in the habit of putting the copper sulfate in the glue even as I was building the patch. And I quit doing that because, again, it's just less likely to have air bubbles, having that granulation in there, getting rid of that and only using it as a skin coat. Because any of that copper sulfate that's in the glue isn't doing anything anyway. It's only the stuff that's actually exposed to the wall that's actually doing the good. So, like I said, it's something that you have to, even if you're considered one of the guys that does this kind of work, you have to keep learning. And I feel that that's something I'm very fortunate that I get to work with a lot of farriers around the country. When I'm teaching them, a lot of times I'm learning at the same time. You know, maybe that an experience that they had, I end up picking out something and I'm able to share with the next group of guys that I'm teaching. That was one of them. And so what I do is a lot of times the last couple coats that I maybe did, I would do without the copper sulfate, which is here just so I'd have a nicer clean patch. But now we removed the top part, and then we removed the drain out of there. We cleaned it up, and let's see what we got here. And then again, we're applying the thrush on, doing that. So a question we asked underneath the patch. So this is something that, again, you can actually see where the outer edges or where that patch was attached. And I got asked to look at this, and I put my fingernail behind it, and it just fell on the floor. And it hadn't been doing anything for a long, long time. You know, it wasn't. You can see how wet and mucky that was. It wasn't attached at all. It was just basically holding debris and dirt and moisture under there, breaking the foot down. And that's why I suggest over and over, take them off and redo that, so you don't end up in that place. And so.
It's not so much the glue, it's what gets under it.
Well, it's just glue. You think of the amount of pressure that's on the foot for it to actually break, right? We're putting a little bit of glue on there and bonding it to the foot. Now that glue is under that pressure, and it's month after month after month. Like, you know, you can't. If we were nailing shoes on, you could only expect those nails to hold that shoe on for a certain length of time, from spring through hunting season. So anyway, same thing with this, you know, it didn't quite make hunting season.
Right.
So anyway, but yeah, no, it's exactly, you want to, it's under a lot of pressure, and I don't expect it, and that's why even when I go to gluing shoes on some of these really high-end performance horses, I try not to stretch their shoeing cycles out a lot, because that glue is under a tremendous amount of stress. And if we could take everything off, clean everything up, get down to a nice foot, even if we don't have to take a lot of foot off, but we get back down to healthy foot again, we keep the momentum going forward of healthy foot. Instead of it getting a little long, moisture start wicking underneath it, and that ended up being the bottom of your foot, you know, instead, you know, if you were gluing shoes on and leaving it too long. So the same thing happens on the bottom side as on the side.
So how long of a cycle is that?
I try to do them on 4 to 5 weeks. Sometimes 10, especially if it's Rachel's horse. So her horses, I told her I'm teaching her well. Farrier's horses always need to be done. So anyway, so some common mistakes that I see. This is a really close friend of mine, and I feel kind of bad that I'm using her picture, but it's a great teaching tool. This horse had a terrible quarter crack. They kept taking it to the university. They kept chopping and twisting and cutting. I was like, and I said, listen, just listen to me. All you got to do is clean this thing up, put the drain in it, patch it, shoe it, and you're going to be okay. Well, finally, after a year of unbelievable amount of money that she spent on it, trailing this thing back and forth to the university, she finally listened to me. And she's a good farrier, but she just felt like this was out of her wheelhouse. So she said, I'm not going to do it. So a mistake that she was making was again, I was talking about how important it is to make that patch all the way up at the cornet band. Well, what so many people do is you can see this thing is bleeding down on the bottom. And hopefully you can see that. Everybody wants to keep digging at the ground contact. They're like, I got to fix that. You know, that's where it's all. That's what they think they're standing on. That seems to be the part that we need to fix. A lot of times you can leave that alone at the ground. I'm not saying you don't want to take care of it, but the thing of it is that you've got to get it knitted at the top to get it to grow down, or you're never going to get anywhere. And so in this picture, you can kind of see that the top up by the cornet band has not really been taken care of or cleaned properly. And that's where I finally was able to teach her that you have to clean that area up. And once you got that knitted, sure enough, that horse is in great shape. And it's got a big old scar there, but she hasn't had any trouble with him since. So this is a video, which probably isn't going to work. No, it doesn't look good. So I use a book to describe cracks to my clients. So I hold the pages towards you and put my hands on either side of the book cover, and I slide it up and down. I said, this is basically your hook wall on either side, and this is your lamina. You get that movement in there. And we got to get rid of that hinge or that movement in there. And that's why we're going to patch it. So I flip the book over and I should put the stem or the back or whatever it's called to them. And I say, but if you haven't investigated that crack all the way to the bottom, I move the book again, and so that stem is still not moving, but the back of the book is able to move. And that's why it's so important to investigate those cracks if they're undermined medial or laterally, to the front or back, I'm sorry, you have to get to the base of that crack before you're going to be able to truly stabilize it. And when you put the drain in there, you're actually medicating the deepest, most likely place that's going to get infected, not the surface area of the crack. So that's the key thing. But it's a great tool to be able to show people and just kind of explain why you're doing what you're doing. So, you know, it's really neat when you have the successes of it. Everyone, you know, as I said, I make sure that everybody's kind of involved in knowing what's going on with this horse. Try to get involved in the aftercare so that they're really paying attention to it. I try to, you know, always try to keep a lot of history on horses, way more than I used to in the early days. I'm dealing with a lot more and more high-end horses. And in cases, sometimes we get called back on a horse that we haven't seen for a year or two. You know, I mean, he's a repeat offender, but he's been great. Maybe he's been around the world before he shows back up in Wellington again, and he's got another problem. So, again, watching your horses perform is something that I've tried to do better and better at. I'm kind of under strain with my workload. I have a manufacturing company that we make shoes. I'm partners with some other companies, and I shoe horses on the side. You know, I mean, so it's gotten to where it's more and more difficult for me to really spend a lot of time in the field. And Rachel came to work for us 2 years ago, and she came to buy a pair of boots for a laminated horse. And the next thing I know is she's working for me in the office, and pretty soon she wants to come right along with me to you know, help out and watch when I'm doing this kind of work. And it's great because she was able to learn and get educated, so that if somebody ordered something or had a question and I wasn't around the office, I was gone, she was able to answer a lot of questions. And in the process, the next thing I know is she's actually getting really good at this and might put me out of work. So I'm pretty proud of her that she's been able to do that, and it's really rewarding to start. I never, at this point in my life, really wanted to have an apprentice. And now I find myself kind of enjoying the fact that I got somebody that's going to be able to kind of take over and be able to fulfill it. I've been out of town and had people call me up and have some quarter cracks. I've sent Rachel in, and I mean top horses, and she's been so there with me for the past 2 years. Nobody questions her coming in and working on quarter crack. And it's pretty cool to know that people have the confidence in her to turn her loose even though I'm not there. So that to me, I feel I've done a good job of trying to pass it on. So this is a kind of a cool case, and no horse is exactly alike, all right? No case is exactly alike. It's one of the reasons why I have a really hard time with a lot of veterinarians that want to have a clinical study, and this is how we have to do it, because this is what the book says. This horse is a 2-time Breeders' Cup horse that I shot both times. It was Breeders' Cup wins. After the first time that he won, he actually ended up having a fractured hind leg. I think it was a hop. Because he had made so much money and had won the Breeders' Cup, they were just going to send him straight to the breeding. But the thing of it was breeding had already started. So, and with the injury to his hind leg, he wasn't able to go into stud. So I said, well, we'll just go through and let him heal up and see where we're at with the horse, and maybe we can run him next year, and then he can retire after next year's Breeders' Cup. Not thinking I would be lucky enough to win it, but hopefully. So what happens? The horse goes ahead, hind leg heals up great, goes back to work. He's doing amazing. Looks maybe better than he did the year before. Having the rest helped him. The rest of his body is doing really good. He's got 2 possible prep races before the Breeders' Cup, and so they're at Del Mar, and in his first prep race back. And what's he do? He stumbles leaving the starting gate. He literally rips the whole ball with his foot off. I'm sorry, I'm running out of air here. I get the small water. All that hot air. Hopefully that'll help. So anyway, they started treating it. It was healing up beautiful. They're like, we're on track. Everything's good. I think it was 28 days before the Breeders' Cup. and they weren't able to run in the second prep that they had hoped for because they were trying to heal his foot up and trying to keep him in light training. I think it's 28 days from the time, 28 days from the race. This thing splits open, looks like somebody dropped a watermelon from the second story window. Bob calls me up and says, dude, I need you on a plane today. And so I fly out to California, and I get there, and he just told me the horse had a quarter crack. They didn't send me any pictures. I had no idea what I was walking into. I get there, and it's all bandaged up, and they take the bandage off, and I was like, holy shit, like, I have no idea what to do with this thing, you know? So I told myself, let me just think about this for a little bit, you know, and I walked up to the track kitchen, got a cup of coffee, and went to this rail and smoked about 4 cigarettes in 2 minutes. And, you know, I'm like, you know, this guy just spent a lot of money to put me on a plane to get me here as quick as possible. I got to at least try, right? So he had a great farrier that was always really good, that worked with me. Tom Dolan was his name. And he says, my truck's your truck anytime you fly in. So he parked his truck there. I'm going through his truck looking at things like, what the hell am I going to do here? And I found a pad. And I'm looking at it, feeling it. So it was a synthetic, like a rubber pad, a Castle, I don't know, remember for sure what brand it was. And so what I did is I started heating it up with a heat gun. And I laid a towel over the bulb of the heel. Let me put this. So I laid a towel over the heel, and I took that plastic and I started molding it over the bulb of the heel. So then what I did is I drilled a bunch of little small holes in it, and I created basically a cap that would go over that whole area. And I drilled a bunch of holes in it to where I tried to get the glue to be able to bond to it. So then I actually lined it with, I took super glue and I lined that, and I took felt and I glued to it. Now, I wetted the felt with super glue, stuck it on there. I took the regular methacrylate glue and I went around the edges of it to hold it in place. Put a shoe on them. I 3/4 the shoe and I wrapped the glue around the bottom of the foot to kind of create almost like as if he had a shoe there behind the foot, but I was able to kind of roll and kind of give it stability in the heel, but yet not have, and if he was wearing it, it could wear down a little bit as well. Sent him to the track, he's sound. They brought me back in about 5 or 6 days before the race, and I took everything. They breezed him that morning and got the speed work out of the way. I took everything off, and it had healed enough to where I was actually able to put pretty much a traditional patch on it with a drain in it. And again, I basically made a full cap of the entire heel of the foot out of glue, 3/4 the shoe, and just kind of blended that bottom part of that patch in with the foot, or with the shoe. And he went on to win the Breeders' Cup the second time in a row. One of the most successful quarter cracks I probably have ever done until last year. I didn't say that out loud. Nobody knows he had a quarter crack. But anyway, I have never done one like it again. So, you know, that's what I'm saying is, it's like sometimes it's not textbook. It's, you got to think on your feet and figure out what you can do. And so it's really satisfying to be able to do that. But again, you just got to try to not sometimes get yourself stuck in a rut that this is the way we do things. You have to sometimes look at the situation and try something different. Be bold enough to go where you haven't been before. So, you know, some common questions that I have. How, you know, I got a quarter crack. How long is it going to be before I can get be able to get this horse back to work? And in many cases, I literally I've had a horse that was in the Nations Cup a few years back. He cracked that morning while he was in the ring, just doing some flat work. I was brought in, I patched him, and he went in the ring and was double clear that night. And that helped the team win the Nations Cup that evening. So it's not always that case, but in a lot of cases I can. So how long do I need to medicate them? I tell them, you keep medicating this thing until it's grown out. And like I said, I want to keep them involved, and I really stress the fact that they're part of this, part of the success of this patch. And they really get in, they get their teeth in it and get behind it and do it. And they learn a lot in the same process, to where that if they ever see it again, they know what to do. So, and you got that about changing the patch on a monthly basis. We already went over all that. I always do the drain, oh yeah. People say, when do you quit putting a drain in? Yeah, occasionally when I get to a point where it's bleeding obvious, you don't really need a patch here to find out what's an option today.
What's your reasoning for rarely lacing anymore?
Just basically because of the success rate that I've had and the fact that it's easier for me to go back on a monthly basis. If you lace them, you can't go back every month. You drill holes, you put laces in, you put all that in. You start trying to take that apart every month, you're going to have a mess on your hand. And if one of them goes bad, you're going to have a mess on your hand. I mean, if they go well, they work great. If they don't go well, it's not good, because you end up losing a lot of wall on both sides of the crack. And yeah, just, you know, and you'll see a lot of times when you go ahead and drill those, you know, the next thing you know, it's just like we were looking at that patch that was there that was breaking down the hook wall. Same thing's happening sometimes those stitches. Underneath, when you start rasping, that whole piece will just fall off there, and it's all mucky and cracked underneath where those laces are. Right. So in closing, I always put a picture of Red up there. I honestly owe that guy. He passed away a few years ago now. But when I started doing this with my shoes, it was very hard for me to get a platform like this to be able to talk to you guys and talk about what I do, because I was like really the only guy doing it. And no one said, well, he sells his own stuff, we don't want to have him. The magazines didn't want to write about it because it was like, well, we're giving you an infomercial, you know, because it's your product, it's you doing it. And Red kind of was the one that was bold enough to say, no, this is different enough to where people need to know about it. And I owe a lot to Red and Brad Yurga. I don't know if you guys know Brad. Those are the two people that stuck their neck out and were able to start putting this out there where people started learning about it. And gave me a lot of exposure that I was just having not something that I was really going out and looking for. And in the racing world, I always kind of say, we've never advertised, we've never done anything. I don't really need to. Like the people that need to know about me usually know about me. But as you start getting a company, it's hard to have that be the case. But we've literally done this like kind of organically, where so a friend wanted a pair of shoes, and then a friend of his wanted a pair. You know, same thing with the patches. You know, you help out a guy. Next thing you know is one of his buddies is having trouble, and he said, hey, you know, this guy helped me out. Give him a call, maybe he can help you out. And it's something that I stress so much is that depending on what kind of business that you're in, for me, it's been really rewarding to be able to go in and help the in-house farrier, not only help them maybe save their job, but teach them something that they're able to take and help their other customers down the road with. And I'll tell you what, that's a loyalty that it's amazing, because those people keep coming back to you with, a lot of times they get into, they may be as good at this as you are or I am anymore, but maybe they got a really high-end customer that's really difficult, and they're like, you know what, Curtis is better at handling those kind of people than I am. You know, are you interested in this job? And so I keep getting referrals from people that I've taught how to do the work. So it's pretty neat how it keeps going. And the same thing with you is, if you're working in an area where like one of you guys is more inclined to maybe do some of this work than others, well, try to make sure that you leave that guy his job. And guess what? He'll end up using you again in another one of his jobs. If you go in there and use that to get his job away from him and say how much better you are than that guy, it's not going to go well for you. And you're going to, you know, it's just not necessary. And in this day and age, it's just amazing how much we've all been able to work together, teaching people. You know, 20, 30 years ago, this is unheard of. You know, if somebody was doing a crack like that, they would shut down, absolutely shut down, and not show you what they were doing. So, anyway, I think we're about done. Maybe get some lunch in. So, Brian's putting the hook on.